Career of Douglas Gageby, who died recently. We bring you an interview recorded in 1999 with John Bowman.
Douglas Gageby was born in 1918. He was brought up in Belfast before going to Trinity College, Dublin. He served in the Irish Army during the war, after which he worked as a journalist in Dublin with the Irish Press Group. He went on to become editor of the Irish Times. He retired in 1986.
Douglas Gageby, you've had a very distinguished career in journalism, editor of the Irish Times, and before that a long career with the Irish Press Group. Do you believe journalists are born, or can they be made?
Well, there are a lot of colleges running courses in them now. I think the essential thing is curiosity. And if you haven't got curiosity and interest in people, you might as well be doing something else. I think to some extent, the very good journalist is born, not made. I would instance John Healy, a natural, and like several others in my day. Donald Foley, an absolute natural for it.
And were you a newspaper reader as a child?
I started very early reading newspapers. I had a lot of bronchial trouble when I was young, and my father used to always bring me home a different paper at lunchtime, throw it down the bed. And one day he came in, threw this paper down the bed and said, "De Valera has just brought out a new newspaper in Dublin." And that was the first number of the Irish Press. And I read it, and I continued to read it on and off. I read it right through college, through the army. I actually wrote a few pieces for it while I was in the army, and approached Sweetman towards the end of the war. Would he have a job for me? He said, "Well, we've got to take some army fellows in." I suppose, "Yeah, well, we'll give you a month's trial." And I joined on the day that Sean T. O'Kelly was inaugurated in June 1945.
Just after the end of the emergency?
The end of the war, anyway. I think the emergency was declared over later, perhaps.
However, you were born in Dublin, but
yes,
grew up in Belfast. You're educated there,
yes,
and your father was a Belfast man who'd come to Dublin. So
yes,
the two cities are
yes,
both home to you, aren't they?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
The border, in a sense, is invisible to you.
I just think of myself as an Irishman, whether I'm north or south or east or west.
What was Belfast like growing up as a boy?
Well, it was... we first lived on a house on the edge of green fields, miles of green fields, with a couple of lovely little streams running through them. And chaps would come down with birdlime to catch linnets or whatever. And I led a sort of rather wild life then. We had a very big garden for some reason. I think somebody had to get out in a hurry. And I enjoyed myself enormously. Couldn't even be got to go to school or church for a long while. But my father would come home in the evening, and there was always a rumble on. He would say now and then, "There was a pub burned out in Agnes Street yesterday." Or he'd come home and said, "I was talking to a couple of policemen just outside the library, a few shots fired there." Now, this wasn't every week, but I remember it constantly through my life there until I went to Dublin in 1937, and then the link was broken to some extent. But my memory is of Belfast as a potentially violent city. I never saw very much action at all. But if you walked across the city and you weren't known, people would say, "Who are you looking at? What are you doing here?" Strangers, always a sort of edginess.
Why did you choose Trinity in Dublin rather than Queen's?
Well, my mother thought Trinity... Well, I didn't particularly want to stay in Belfast. My mother had always said to me, "You go back to the Free State," or whatever you like to call it, back to Dublin.
What did she call it?
I think back to Dublin was what she said, I think. Yeah, she hadn't one particularly politically minded. Again, the border wasn't prominent in her mind, but she thought that Trinity College was the greatest educational institution in the world. Her brother had been there, her elder brother, whom she so admired, and who was killed in France. So you go back and take up some of there and make your life in Dublin, which I intended to do myself.
And did you enjoy those years in Trinity?
Oh, wonderful, particularly the boat club. So wonderful, because I think it cured me of all my bronchial troubles. You know, being out there in little skinny vest and shorts with the rain pelting down on you, and rowing out as far as Poolbeg sometimes when we were doing a long, hard program. I loved that. And we used to go up on days when there was no rowing and help to paint the house. And we then got a license and we'd have one beer, which is all we could afford anyway. And it was a lovely social life. And there were things called at-homes, that is small dances at the end of each term, which were notable. And indeed my wife-to-be was warned off them. Don't go up to that's a bad place to go, a rough place to drink, you know. All sorts of things go on. But she came.
When the war came then, you joined the army, you were in intelligence in neutral Ireland. What did that entail?
Well, I was very far down the line. When I first joined, they said, hold on. When I first applied, hold on. There's a job for you, but it's not coming up yet. And they sent down to interview me a chap who had been at school with me, Captain Robert Boyd. He took down all the details, and I said, the only use I can be of is in German. I speak German very well. I was studying it in college. I'd been three times in Germany for a month or 2 months while I was a schoolboy and when I was a student. And I said, well, hold on, we have a job. The job turned out to be, in the end, German censor in the Curragh, after doing preliminary training, you see. And I had to read the letters coming into the German internees, and I had to read their letters going out, and give a short report each day to the command officer, command IO, command intelligence officer. I also had to clean out his fire and dust his office. And when I was finishing, it was only for about a 4-month stint, I think. When I was finishing, one morning I was down on my hands and knees and ashes all around me, and a very smart young man in uniform came in. I've forgotten, I think he was a corporal or sergeant, and said, where's the German censor? And I looked around and said, I'm the bloody German censor. Good luck to you, chum, and went off.
After the war, you joined the Irish Press Group.
Yes.
What was the culture of the Irish Press Group? What was the ethos there in Berkey?
When you went into the Irish Press, you were told immediately 3 things. Éamon is spelt with 1 N, Éamon de Valera. There is no such place as Navan, County Meath. There is only Anuv. There is no such place as Kells in County Meath. It's Kinannis or Kinannis More. That was the joke. But Sweetman, the editor, I enjoyed immensely. Slightly caustic style. And his assistant editor was Paddy Kerwin. Likewise, there were 2 barristers. The adversarial thing prevailed, and Sweetman would call for about 3 or 4 people at night, bring in their copy and read out to them. And it's very salutary to read out your copy. You read down and say, oh Jesus, why did I say that? They listened always in silence. And then Sweetman would say, I don't know, Kerwin, I think Gageby's got this all wrong. And Kerwin would say, oh no, the beginning is not good.
And you were in the room?
Yes.
You were listening to this?
You were standing there, you eat like an Egypt with your copy, you see. And Anna Kelly called them Lo and Behold. Anna Kelly was the great columnist then, a wonderful woman. Lo and Behold. And they'd argued this out, you see, sometimes forget you practically. And then at the end they'd say, well, Kerwin's right, you changed the beginning there. Anyway, give it to Hunter, Gageby, get rid of it.
When you came into the mainstream Irish press then, you were part of the launch of the Sunday Press, which was very successful commercially, and later in the 50s of the Evening Press, and your first editor of the Evening Press.
Yeah.
Was that important to you, the challenge of a new frontier, a new title, carving out the market?
Well, I liked, you see, the Sunday Press, Matt Feehan was the editor. He hadn't been in a newspaper at all. He was Lemass appointed him as the political man to keep these damn fellas straight. Myself and Dick Wilkes, there were 3 of us in there. And I enjoyed the launch of the Sunday paper, the excitement of it, the fun of it. But, you know, when you're used to daily newspapers, to have to wait a week for the paper to come out is a bit much. And while I had been there about 3 years, I think, and Conor Cruise O'Brien came to me and said that the editor of the Irish News Agency, which you remember Sean McBride set up, was ill, very ill, didn't feel that he could come back as editor, didn't want to leave the agency, but they were looking for a new editor. I think they advertised, but I was asked, would I come? So again, I thought, this has changed. I don't know anything about news agencies. And you learn a lot. You learn, for example, that one man can sit through the night and put out tens of thousands of words, stuff coming in from everywhere. I enjoyed it very much, and Conor kept the politicians off our backs. He was very good. But then the smell of ink, I met Dempsey.
But was that not propaganda, really, on behalf of the government?
It started off as propaganda, but they got hold of Joe Gallagher, the first from PA Writers, ex-Irishman, London-born. His father was from Enniskillen, I think. Joe Gallagher said, "This is all nonsense. It will do the country good just to have a good news agency." And that's what we're doing, and that's what we did. Put out the news. Now, you could then do feature stuff, which you could say, said Ireland was wonderful, but the news was